What a beautiful piece of music. Wow. All right. Thank you for putting that piece of music on. Oh my God, that is amazing music. We'll talk about that music. But first of all, I want to say welcome and good morning. That sounds so weird. Welcome and good morning to Ancestral Eyes. It is a little bit chilly up here in Midland. So yeah, we're a little bit late because, Teresa had to make her cup of coffee, can't function without coffee, right? So got to take my sip, gather around everybody, bring your cup of coffee and stuff. So I want to say welcome to our guest, Angela Puca. Welcome to Jean Jerome, my co-host. And I know Jean Jerome knows something about that piece of music. So what I'm going to ask him is to please introduce that piece of music. And at the same time, this is going to introduce Angela Puca. So Go ahead, Jean Jerome. Tell us a little bit about that piece.
Good morning, everybody. As you know, with Ancestral Eyes, episode 22, amazing. We started this in April of this year during the early stages of the pandemic, and now we're on episode 22. Yeah. And we're very happy to have Angela Puca, our guest today. Doctorate, she graduates this year from her PhD in Italian shamanism and at Leeds University, and I'll go into her intro in a moment. But one thing we discovered this morning, as you know, everybody knows, we usually start the show with a little bit of music. And I had Angela is originally born in Italy, and I had selected some Italian music I thought might be appropriate just to put her in the ambiance. And I was pleasantly surprised that Angela is a PhD student and very much in the academic world by day. And by night, she is an accomplished musician and has her band. And goes by the name of Angela Phoenix, a rocker. So I love it, the balance. Perfect yin and yang right there.
Yeah, the things we find out about our guests. You don't think we're going to find things out about you? Anyway, I want to say welcome, Angela. It's so nice for you to have joined us. I when I did our intro yesterday, to remind everybody to tune in this morning, I had mentioned that you doing your PhD in shamanism, and I said in Italy, but actually you live in England, right?
Yes. First off, allow me to thank you for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here on Ancestral Eyes. Yes. I'm Italian. Pardon?
I said the pleasure is ours. No. Go ahead.
I was saying, yes, I'm Italian, and I moved to England to pursue my academic career and do my PhD, which is submitted now. So I'm waiting for my defense to be arranged in hopefully around the beginning of November. And I'm also lecturing. I'm also lecturing now at Leeds Trinity University. So I'm teaching there.
Oh, very good.
Excellent. Well, good luck and all the best. And I'm sure you're going to do well. So there's no question about it. So now, Angela, as we always ask all our guests right from the start, we want to know how people got on their journey. What was their personal journey? What prompted you to get to what you were doing? This definitely, obviously, a personal journey led you on an academic career. So if you want to just take us through, I know you're going to,
Teresa?
Oh, yes, the intro.
Teresa, have a sip of coffee. One more sip of coffee.
Yeah.
I'll read the intro.
Look at me.
All right.
One sip of coffee and I'll sit and blah, 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 blah.
You're fumbling through. All right. So I'm very honored to read this intro. So Angela joined Leeds Trinity University, as she mentioned, in 2016, and is currently a lecturer in the Department of Theology and Religious Studies. Angela's degrees are in philosophy with a particular focus on Eastern philosophies. During her academic formation, she studied Latin, ancient Greek, Sanskrit, and Tibetan,
Wow.
classical and modern, to translate primary sources of interest from different philosophical and religious traditions. During her master's degree, she expanded her knowledge in the field of religious studies, especially Buddhism and the Indian and Tibetan religions at the University of Naples, L'Orientale in Italy, as well as the University of Hamburg in Germany. Afterwards, her research interests moved towards paganism and shamanism, their contemporary manifestations across the Italian territory. And I think that's one of the major focuses of our show today, is that particular study. She's currently about to complete her PhD, as she mentioned. She's submitted her thesis for defense on Indigenous and Trans-cultural Shamanism in Italy, which will be awarded by the University of Leeds. I'll say it right from the front, if you want to reach Angela, Angela is a very busy young woman. She has her own podcast YouTube channel called Angela Puca Symposium. And I'll be scrolling that information a little bit later through the show. And she has her own YouTube channel, which is called Angela's Symposium. Okay?
Nice.
So over to
All
you,
right.
Teresa.
How can you tell I haven't woken up yet?
So more coffee, I'm telling you. It's about the Java.
More coffee. This is my first cup. Come on, give me a break, guys, okay? So anyway, all right. So focus, center, ground. Hi, Angela. Sorry about that. I just want to hear your story because I know this is going to be a really fascinating show, and I'm just going to let you take it away. You obviously know my first question is your personal journey and how this brought you to your academic career, and just take us through that, please. It's going to be fascinating. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you, Teresa. And Jean-Jerome, your Italian pronunciation is really on point. So
he's impressive.
Yes, I'm impressed. Well, as the biography said, I started out as a philosophy student. So I was doing my degrees in philosophy. But then I got really interested in Eastern philosophies, in especially Asian philosophies, that be better than to say rather than Eastern philosophy. But yeah, I got really interested in Asian philosophies and religions, especially Buddhism. And so I learned Sanskrit and Tibetan because I wanted to access sources. But actually, throughout my academic journey, I've always been interested in paganism, witchcraft, and these kind of topics. But what really changed for me at some point, I'd say the turning point, was actually realizing that these topics could be pursued as an academic subject of research, which actually this happened thanks to a YouTube video, where Dr. Jenny Butler, she's a lecturer at University College Cork in Ireland, and now we are friends actually. But at the time, I was still at university, and I saw this video of her explaining her PhD research. She was at the time a PhD student, and it was about witchcraft and paganism in Ireland. And so I thought, wow, so it is possible to study these kind of subjects from an academic point of view. And that was kind of enlightening to me. And then
inspired. Yes,
it was really inspiring because still now, even now in Italy, you wouldn't really be able to pursue these kind of topics from an academic point of view. So that's why I moved to the UK to pursue my PhD, because here I didn't have the chance to address this kind of subject matter from an academic standpoint. And here in the UK, they tend to be very open about
Right.
any kind of topic or subject, provided, of course, the right methodology, the proper sound methodology is employed. So then that's why I moved from studying philosophy and Asian religions and philosophies to paganism and witchcraft in Italy. Because then I started my PhD, which at first was meant to tackle the transcultural forms of shamanism, which are the forms of imported shamanism. So, for example, Lakota shamanism or Siberian shamanism, which are imported in Italy and practiced, somehow translated in the Italian context and practiced by people. This also includes core shamanism, which is a Western-born shamanic tradition. So at first I was only looking at these kind of traditions, which I call, I'm not the only one, but I employ the classification transcultural shamanism. But then during my field work, I encountered a woman who claims to be actually, in present tense, who claims to be the last Italian shaman of an hereditary tradition. And so, of course, that caught my interest. And I spent a few days at hers, living with her, basically, and getting a flavor of her life and everything, and doing participant observation in rituals. And I have collected with her about 10 hours of interviews, and by gathering all the information regarding her tradition, I actually realized that wasn't really new to me. I thought, while we were having a recorded interview, while we were having a discussion, it suddenly it rang a bell, and I thought, well, wait a minute, but what's the difference between your tradition and a form of folk Italian witchcraft? And she replied that the difference is that her tradition has not been syncretized with Catholicism, but which is an interesting answer in and of itself. But it still prompted me to investigate and more into Italian folk magic and Italian witchcraft, and see, and especially the vernacular healers in the countryside, and sometimes actually they can be also found in cities. And so I systematized one branch, we may say, of Italian witchcraft as the tradition of segnature, because the segnatura is actually the core practice in this tradition. And I have already a peer-reviewed article published in the Journal of the Irish Society for the Study of Religions, I believe. You will find it. There's a video on my YouTube channel, Angela Symposium, on Italian witchcraft, and you will find all the references listed in the info box. So and for my thesis, I systematized this vernacular healing tradition as the tradition of segnature, and I argue in my doctoral research that this may in fact be a form of indigenous Italian shamanism, provided we clarify what I mean by indigenous and what I mean by shamanism. But that's keeping them
separate. Okay. Could I just interrupt in what you've just said? Now that's interesting. Okay. First of all, I find it interesting that Italy, being steeped in a lot of mythology, in witchcraft, everyone knows about it, that they would not allow a form of study something formal. Do you think it's because they're still strongly linked with Catholicism, and that that takes such a strong hold on their culture that it would be outrageous to think of studying witchcraft or something like that? Can you just what do you think, Angela?
I think that partly it is because of that, because Italy is still a strongly Catholic country, but it's also because I think from the Italian academia tends to be more focused on historical research rather than contemporary anthropological research. So from what I see and from what I know, I'm under the impression that the Italian academia tends to study more historical topics rather than contemporary traditions, especially practiced in Italy. So this was kind of confirmed when at conferences I've come across Italian scholars and I was explaining what the topic of my research was. And their first question has always been the same. So when I was saying, I'm studying Italian shamanism and witchcraft, they would be asking, in which period? And so, I think that I once read in a novel that in Italy something needs to be 200 years old in order to be considered ancient and hence valuable. And
Right. That's interesting. Now, you mentioned also healers.
Sorry. Before you jump, actually, that last statement you just made is something a prevailing theme or thematic that we encounter. Again, and I'll touch on it later when we go into sort of the question answer and more the discussion portion. But that last statement you made about a mind share or a thought process that unless it's more than 200 years old, it is not valid. That's a very important statement based on what you perceived as the view or the what you saw as the opinion or the attitude.
It was kind of a joke, and maybe it is overemphasizing. Maybe it's overemphasizing the trend that you find among Italian scholars. But I think that there is something true there.
It is very true, and I'll expand upon it later. Go ahead, Teresa. Sorry.
Yes. Okay, for sure. So I made note of that. Now, you were talking about the healers that you had met in the Italian mountainside, and the woman in particular, the one that you had interviewed, and she claims to be the last remaining shaman, indigenous shaman. How is that different from the singatoria that you were saying? Now, there's so many of these Italian phrases thrown out there, stregheria, stregoronia. I'm now confused. So if you could just sort of tell us a little bit about what this woman had been talking about in the sense of her shamanism, without going into great detail, because obviously it's part of your, your paper and we don't want to give it all entirely out. But could you just sort of tell us a little bit about why and what the differences are here?
Do you mean the differences between stregheria, stregoneria, and Italian?
And now this new phrase, singatoria, and how does that link to the shamanism? Just tell us a little bit.
Stregheria, I would say, is an Italian-American tradition, which I don't think it's really related to what I studied, not directly. The stregoneria in Italian means witchcraft, so it's a very generic term to say witchcraft. So it would be like asking you, so what is witchcraft in Canada, for example? So it's very, stregoneria is just a term to say witchcraft in Italy. You don't have a witchcraft tradition, one witchcraft tradition. So what
Right.
I study is the, and I have systematized as the tradition of segnature, because segnature is a gesture, basically, is a mixture actually of gestures and words which get passed down from generations. And they have a specific, so there are specific times when the person can be initiated, and depending on the region, there are people who only initiate blood relatives, and other segnatori, which would also initiate people outside the bloodline. And since I was able to find specific patterns across regions, I actually kind of divided the attitude towards this kind of practices in 2 generations, which I called in my doctoral research the old generation and the new generation. So the old generation, I'd say that they are not really defined by the age group, although of course it is much more common to find in the old tradition, in the old generation, people in an older age range. But what really distinguishes the two is the openness. So the old generation is comprised of people, usually old women or old men, more often than not women. And they tend to live in secluded areas in the countryside, in villages, and they are kind of the village healer or the village witch. But and they tend to be very secretive about their practices, and they would only initiate one person in their bloodline. The new generation is now comprised of people who have been initiated by those in the old generation, but they tend to be more connected. So they tend to be more open, share their practices beyond the internet, and especially Facebook has been essential to these practices to become more widespread, and for people from different regions to actually get a knowledge of these practices. So there is a starkly different attitude depending on the generation we are talking about, because we have a very secretive generation which wouldn't really share their practices. They wouldn't talk about it to anybody. And you have people in the new generation who share their segnature online, and they also give like online services and initiations and things like that. But they tend to still stick to the tradition somewhat, because, for example, according to the tradition, you can only be initiated on Christmas Eve's night.
Yes, and we've heard that.
In some cases, also on the night preceding Easter. But in the large majority of the case that I've come across, Christmas Eve night is the magical time for this initiation to occur.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm getting a little bit more of an understanding. I thank you for that. So now the younger generation, obviously they've been initiated by the older generation. And do you think that they're coming forward to be more open and more connected so that this tradition doesn't die, right? Is this tradition, is that what you refer to as segnature? Is that correct?
I call it the tradition of segnature. The segnatura is, it might be complicated because now we go into the Italian language, but segnatura is singular, segnature is plural, and those who perform the segnature are the segnatori. So
I understand.
Sorry to complicate things.
Okay. So, so do you think that they, that they're more open and wanted to stay connected so that they don't lose these traditions, do you think? And that's why they're open in talking with you.
I think they mostly just find them useful and effective. So from what I've seen, they exchange these segnature because they need them. I mean, they need healing from those kind of diseases, and so they exchange them. Of course, there are cases where they want to carry on the tradition and don't want it to die out. But I'd say that perhaps in most cases, they just want something effective to heal
to boost, let's say, traditional medicine, so to speak, or to find, extra healing, so to speak. With these type of segnature, do they use divination in any sense before they, let's say, administer any sort of healing, that type of thing?
Yes, for example, in my home region, which is Campania, because I'm from Naples, there is a form of divination to see whether you have the evil eye, which is called the malocchio.
Malocchio.
So, yes.
Yeah, malocchio.
And then I want to talk about this different symbols, but go ahead. Yes, the malocchio.
Yes. So, for example, they would pour drops of oil into water. And if the oil dissolves into the water, it means that you have the evil eye. Whereas if it stays separate, you're just fine, because of course that's what the oil is supposed to do, to stay separated from water. So the idea is that if the oil gets blended within the water, it means that there is something supernatural that is interfering with your energy.
With your general, okay. All right. So they use the divination tool or divinatory system depending on what it is that they're looking for. There isn't, like, let's say, one general, like a casting of bones and stones to find what's going on. They more or less do it specifically to what. Like, how do they determine that you have the evil eye? Does the person come and tell them, or do they just have a way of finding out that the person has the evil eye?
That depends on the region, and it depends on the healer or which. You may find that in different regions there are different procedures, but also different. Like, for example, I have encountered healers or witches, whatever we want to call them. Of course, nobody calls them neither of the two. In some regions, there are specific names to address these people, but normally they are left labelless, I'd say. So it's just the woman who heals this, or the man who will help you with that. So that is important to highlight, because these are labels which are kind of superimposed to understand the phenomenon. So what was I saying? Oh yes, that I have come across witches or healers that were able to tell you what you had just by looking at you. So, for example, I've encountered one of these vernacular witches who, just by looking at me, told me what was my blood type and other conditions that I've had in the past. And it was funny because before I met her, she sent me a friend request on Facebook. And so I thought, now she's going to find something about me and try to impress me, pretending that she knows things about me. But then actually she said things that she couldn't have got from.
She couldn't have, yeah. Okay.
From
Interesting.
Facebook or from any other source.
Okay. So I get the impression that they have a natural ability, these healers, to be able to divine and sense. So there's a little bit of maybe mysticism, mediumship qualities associated with these healers?
That's medium. That's straight out mediumship.
Totally,
That's
isn't it?
somebody who
Yeah,
has
yeah.
a very, very clear connection with their ancestral spiritual guide, and they can see. In Cuba, there's still today many, my mom's time. My mom was doing a very similar work in
Mm-hmm.
Cuba with the UNESCO in terms of studying and recording and interviewing. That's why I love this interview with Angela, because it reminds me of my mom's work and
Yeah.
that stage of her life. But
Yes, yes, what she
in
was
Cuba,
doing.
yeah, and Cuba, anybody who's been or who's seen Cuban Spiritista, there are Cuban healers that when they have their ancestral spiritual guide, because their ancestral spiritual guide was, let's say, in its previous incarnate, was a doctor, in other words, was a healer, has an understanding, they could tell you, like, you've got, a tumor in the, left quadrant of the body and everything else, and so forth, right? So that is
Mhm,
like 100% mediunidad, or the ability to see and have the
mhm,
ability of sight,
mhm.
right? So
It's
that's marvelous.
interesting.
It's nice to see that it's preserved. It's
Yeah,
nice to
it's
see that.
interesting because you said the oil, the water in the oil. I know in some Slavic countries, this is how they divine for, I don't know what significance it is for them when they do this, but in our Slavic countries, they're dying out. The Molfars, the Ukrainian
Foreign
Molfars.
glad,
Pardon?
foreign glad.
Oh, you mean the Ukrainian? Sorry,
No,
I
I
didn't
mean that
understand.
another practice that they do in Italy, and I think they also do in Slavic countries, is pouring lead as a form of
Oh,
divination.
lead. Yes,
Yes,
pouring lead. Yes, I was going to say. And then they do the pouring lead. There's the wax as well. They use beeswax, that type of thing. They have, like, as I was saying, they have the natural healers like the Molfars. There's another term, and I can't remember. The Ukrainian, there's women that do they're healers as well. And it's a form of not so much divination, but again, it's this mediumship that they're able to connect with. They have the whispering witches in Poland, the Szeptuchy, and they are very synchronized with Catholicism. Okay, they're being told by their spirits, and when they speak, and when I've seen just a video clip of them, I'm sure they're out there. Everybody's seen it, or maybe not, but anyway, they do this thing where you can hear them talking, and it's like they're connecting directly with their spirits, right? So I find that interesting, very interesting. I wanted to say something about when you were talking about the type of tools or what they do in order to work what they do. You said gestures and words. Now, this automatically makes me think of figa. Okay, is that something that they would use as a gesture? That would signify something without
no,
disinvulging anything if it's secretive or anything. But what did you mean by gestures and words?
no, the mano. Maybe you mean the horns, or
The horns, yeah, but isn't there the figa, where the thumb between the fingers? Is that another
but
gesture?
that is another gesture, but it's not that common in Italy.
Oh, okay.
It's the horns are much more common, and it is a way to ward off evil. I still do them now. So when somebody says, "Oh, I hope that your defense goes well," I'm like, "Okay."
Okay. Interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
all right, that's good.
Normally, the horns are used as in popular culture. So it's not just something that the segnatori would do. It's
Yeah,
just a way
Okay.
of kind of warding off negative chances or negative
like an evil
outcome.
eye, against the evil eye, right?
Yeah, like saying, "Oh, I'm not gonna experience that. It's not gonna happen to me. Everything is going to go well." So the gestures and words are, as I said, passed down from usually their grandmother or grandparents. And there are certain regions where, like in Piemonte, and I think in Lombardia, where you find more men, but normally it tends to be more women. So the most common thing is the grandmother who initiates the granddaughter, for instance.
Okay.
And the gestures and words are secretive. So usually
You would
the
know.
words
Yeah.
usually the words tend to be in the local dialect, and nobody can hear them. So even, for example, when they are performing a healing ceremony, they will pronounce them in a way that the person would not hear them, because they believe that if somebody else can hear those words, they would lose their power. So
yes. And that's why probably like the witches in Poland, the szeptuchy, they whisper. Again, it's this sense of, it's only between them and their divine spirit, right, that hear it, right? So
that's probably the term why they call them whispering witches.
That's what I said, szeptuchy, whispering witches, exactly.
Yeah, that's why I also said as I said in the private conversation which we had before this live, going on international conferences, I've met other scholars who have studied folk witchcraft in other central European countries. And it seems that there are certain patterns that are found not just in Italy, but in other European countries as well. So it would be interesting in the future to do like a collaborative research so that we can actually investigate this further.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, that really does. No, that'd be excellent. Definitely, for sure.
It's difficult to find funding for that, but one of the reasons I opened my YouTube channel was to raise awareness towards the academic study of these practices, and not only for practitioners who watch my YouTube channel, but also for the academics. So to me, it is a way of showing them, see how many people are watching my channel. This means that it matters. This means that we need funding to carry out the research. So hopefully that will work.
That's one of the reasons. A very similar motif is why we started the Ancestral Eyes, because the idea of the Ancestral Eyes was not just to focus on my own practice, primarily of Ifa, Orisa, and Vodou, but also to look
connect.
at connect with other spiritual belief systems which have ancestral traditions, where the ancestor, the Joto of those traditions, in those for those people, help them to keep those traditions alive, and to let people know this is not just one person in one dark forest or the bottom of a basement, by themselves doing something occult. But no, it is part of a resurgence. It is part of an ancestral memory, an ancestral memory that is echoing and is reawakening. My good friend, which I've done much research with over the last 7 years, Bocono Dafoji, who works with the university in Uruguay. He's a practitioner, but he's also part of the anthropology department in one of the universities in Montevideo. He's done presentations, both academic and practitioners, and the whole issue is to the whole thematic of the resurgence, the reawakening of ancestral memory, of the old ways, the old gods, the old, and the fact that it's never stopped. It's continued. It's been sort of under the radar, but when you sort of pull away the curtain, of modern society, you're seeing it. You're seeing that there are many pockets of practice all over the world, right? not just in the Orisha and the overall umbrella of Orisha or Yoruba or Vodun community, which represents in its totality the sixth largest belief system in the world. But all of these, like more broadly, like shamanism and shamanic traditions and indigenous belief systems all over the world. And what you say is that the commonalities, there's so many areas, so many aspects that are in common. Even through these shows, we've basically reaffirmed that there are more points in common than there are differences. There are some
Absolutely.
religious or cultural differences, but the essence, the physics of it, if you will, the laws of it remain the same, almost untouched, unaltered between all of these traditions as you do a comparative, right?
No, absolutely. And I think that's something to understand, that we're all linked. It's just the different countries and cultures that observe them or practice them. Yet, you start to see there is a familiarity between the countries and certain systems and how they practice. There is a commonality even in the tools that they use, right? And I think the thought form behind all of that. So that's something that's important to understand as well, and being able to express that. So Angela, tell us a little bit more. I find it's interesting that you would leave Italy and go to England to attach yourself to a university. It's Leeds, isn't it? That you're that you're attached to do your PhD, correct?
My PhD will be awarded by the University of Leeds, but it's also with Leeds Trinity University, and I'm currently lecturing at Leeds Trinity University. So just to...
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, I'm fascinated by all of this and everything that you have said. I find it's very, very interesting. This whole idea, like for your paper, the documenting, the observing to a degree, without doing any sort of active rituals with people. You've sort of pursued this from an observing point of view.
I have done rituals with them using participant observation.
That's where I was going. Exactly. I was going to ask you, have you been invited to observe some of the rituals, perhaps? And if you could share without, disinvulging anything. Obviously, they wouldn't invite you to something that was, secretive or initiatory. I'm just going by that. So go ahead, Angela, if you could tell us.
Well, smiling. I think let me tell you. I'll let Angela. I want Angela to answer that. But Angela, answer that, and I'll make an anecdote. I'll tell you an anecdote of that.
Yeah.
So my answer is that for my research, I used participant observation, which in anthropology is a methodology, which means that you will actively participate in rituals as a participant observer. So you are participating, but you are also kind of maintaining your analytic lens, so to speak.
Right.
So luckily the people I have encountered, since I normally, when I can, I spend quite some time with them, and luckily they tend to trust me. So they actually want to show me things. And I think that part of the reason is that usually people who practice magical practices or occult practices kind of want to involve the scientific and academic world as a means of validating their practices. Either to validate their practices or to divulge, still validate them by addressing them. So, for example, the practices of Don Juan became very famous because Carlos Castaneda wrote about them. So if I write about a specific practice or a specific tradition or a specific witch, that person will kind of be get something from it in terms of academic validation, even though, of course, we are not validating people's practices. We are just analyzing them and describing them and trying to understand the cultural network they are immersed in. But from the practitioners and the community's point of view, it tends to be a form of validation. And so for this reason, it is quite common for practitioners to actually want to involve me in their practices. And they want me to show these kind of things. And then they tend to ask me what I think about them.
Okay. Interesting. So what do you think of them?
From a personal point of view, from an academic point of view?
Academic and personal, if you want. I mean, you know.
From an academic point of view, I think that these are extremely fascinating practices. And I think it's a pity that so far they have been discarded as superstition. And they are widely known. I'd say that 9 Italians out of 10 will have had a knowledge. I mean, either they have been to the town healer or they know somebody who has had any encounter with town healer. So it is very widespread, and yet it is underground. So it is something that most people know about, but people don't openly talk about it because it doesn't really fit the theoretical framework we live in, which does not include the practice of magic. So people tend to exclude it because it doesn't fit the current paradigm. So as a scholar, I find that it is interesting to analyze cultural phenomena without judgment. Just because they do not fit the current paradigm, which says that magic is excluded outright, we shouldn't not study these practices just because of that. But actually, that makes them even more interesting from an academic point of view, to see what outliers have to say about our culture and whether there are, maybe this theoretical framework is not as sound and widespread and agreed upon as we may think.
Yes, and that's a very, very valid point. It's to look at it without judgment and flavoring with your own, your own personal interpretations, right? And that's always very, very hard, especially when you're looking at a practitioner who is obviously immersed in this and does believe strongly in what they're doing. So, I commend you for being able to do that. Go ahead, Jean Jerome. I know you're going to interject with something.
I think, one of the things we, again, through the show, The Ancestral Eye, we wanted to reach out to both practitioners, spiritual practitioners, but also the academic, the people who do the academic study seriously and with really the intention for the search of knowledge and an empirical or objective approach without prejudice, without any preconceived notion, but really observe the phenomena, observe and document the phenomena, the traditions, the evidence, both in terms of the practice, people that participate, and so forth. Because we talked about, we've sort of brushed it. A lot of these traditions were, let's call a spade, were suppressed violently for millennia by the Catholic Church, and through slavery. And in the diaspora, with the African belief systems and all that, the whole birth of syncretism, which you touched upon briefly, syncretic, was in order to avoid persecution or avoid the Inquisition or avoid any type of retribution by the community because of stigmas and phalanxes in terms of that a person who has the gift and who has works as a healer
Mhm.
is within a Catholic or Judeo-Christian sometimes framework, or even Islamic, is considered to be committing some form of sin or some form
Mhm.
of act
Mhm.
against God when it's furthest from the truth, right? I mean,
Right.
and although science, in terms of like physics, medicine, and astronomy, those had their own sort of shock therapy and fight with the Catholic or religious institutions, and from time to time there's a
Mhm.
clash of Christian or Judeo-Christian Islamic versus science.
Mhm.
They've more or less become that mainstream you describe, right? People think in material,
Yeah.
scientific, physical terms. So the area of magic then had a different, not enemy, but a different opponent view, which was that of what they call a rational or scientific mind. Oh, that everything has a scientific or natural explanation. It doesn't have
Mhm.
really a supernatural component. So doing what
Absolutely.
you're doing is critical. And that's why, in terms of funding or in terms of anything we can do collectively from Ancestral Eyes and all our previous guests, we always extend an invitation to pool ideas, to pool research, to pool attention to the
Yeah.
seriousness and importance of this work, of this anthropological work,
Mhm.
and in terms of preserving, observing,
Mhm.
recording these
Mhm.
traditions so they're not suppressed, so they're not
Mhm.
pushed into the underground by
Mhm.
persecution and so forth is critical.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think this is definitely for sure. Um, so okay, so now I'm I'm at the point where I get a better understanding of what's going on as far as Italian shamanism and witchcraft, etc. It's become a little bit more clearer to me. So, Jean Jerome, I'm going to hand this over to you. And if you want to go from wherever it is you want to go to, please go ahead. I need a second cup of coffee because I'm not awake yet.
Okay, no worries. No, so picking up on that theme now, in your observations, in your anthropological, study and recording and your participant observation, did you have a sense from the practitioners that there is still a great deal, not of ignorance about their practice, but even like fear or discrimination or any type of derogatory sort of sentiment towards those practitioners? That they were they comfortable in terms of their practice, or did they feel that they were somehow always being watched or being under some sort of scrutiny by authorities, by the church, by their fellow town members? What is the I like to look at a more human aspect. What is the life of these practitioners like in terms of their their ability to have freedom to practice their beliefs?
Mm. Well, yes, that really depends on the, as I said, I categorized the two generations because they have a
Mhm.
very different attitude towards these kind of practices. And
Right.
also it depends on the region and on the person. I'd say that overall, yes, there is still a stigma attached to these practices. And those who are outside tend to have they tend to think of them as superstitious practices, so they still have this stigma attached to them. And especially those in the old generation, they tend to be very especially secretive about it because they fear judgment,
Mhm.
partly because they fear judgment, and partly because they feel like if they share too much about their practices, they will lose the power. So it is a combination of these two elements, whereas the new generation tends to be more open about them, and they don't care as much about what other people say, or the possible stigma that they may have as practitioners of these practices. So yeah, it is quite varied. I'd say that overall, if you were to ask the average Italian who's not into esotericism or into these kinds of practices, and you would talk about these traditions, they would say that, oh, it's just superstition. For example, there have been quite a few Italians when I was in Italy, and I was, randomly explaining to people outside those communities, just, the average person in Italy, what I was doing. They were like, oh, really? Do you study that? Like, the impression I was under was that they considered it to be something not worth studying from an academic point of view. That's the impression that I got. But yeah, I say that there is still a stigma attached to this tradition, and this is one more reason for me to study them, because, as I said, I think there is quite especially with practice which involve magic, esotericism, occult traditions. I find, and it's not just my opinion, actually, there has been a book published on this, which is called The Scientification of Religion, by a professor who I think is still at the University of Amsterdam. And I think that there is, specifically for magic practicing traditions, a relationship with academia, with the academic world. So if you look at the rebirth of many traditions from the 1950s onwards, they tend to have some kind of association with academia. For example, Wicca was born because Gerald Gardner was backing his claims thanks to the works by Margaret Murray, the Egyptologist.
Yes.
And even with shamanism, Carlos Castaneda was a PhD student, and Michael Harner was an academic himself, an anthropologist. So if you look at quite a few traditions who have been born or saw a rebirth, they tend to have some kind of association with the academic world. Even here in Britain, Druidry has been classified as a religion thanks to an academic.
Yes, absolutely.
Their first application was rejected, and then there was an academic, Graham Harvey, professor at the Open University, who wrote a letter which was sent alongside the application, and then they got granted the charity status, which is a way of being classified as a religion here in the UK. So I think that there is a strong link between the academic world and magic practicing communities, I think.
And that's important. I think it is, because again, it lends not only to the validation, but sometimes it leads to an acknowledgement. Like, for example, we got Jenny Udzo, one of our former guests, from your show.
And Angela's former guest, because Angela had her as a guest on Angela's Symposium before.
Jenny is a friend of mine. We were just chatting before I joined here. So Jennifer as well.
Exactly.
So a shout out to Jennifer, which is a practicing druid.
Hi,
Jenny.
Hi. Yes, exactly. And this is what we wanted a druid, right? And it was Jean Jerome who had observed her on your show. So we were like, oh, let's get her on, right? So anyway, so we were grateful for that. And then, Jean Jerome said, why don't we get Angela? And I go, oh, okay, sure. It sounds excellent. So we're glad. We're really, really glad about this. There was something I was going to say about the practices back in the 50s and the 60s, and having the the tie to an academic sense in order to lend validation. Do you think that this still holds true? Let's say, well, obviously it is, because this is what you're doing. Do you think that there is going to be, with this academic procedures and things, more of an acceptance in order to acknowledge and, let's say, validate more and more ancient practices? Like, I'm talking outside of England, outside of, well, for example, in Italy. Do you think your paper is going to make a difference for those who practice in Italy?
I hope so. I was asked by I got a proposal from the University of Rome Press to publish the Italian translation of my research. So surely most Italians don't really speak or read English, although many think they do, but they don't. And so, yeah, I don't think that the English publication of my research will make much of an impact because of the language barrier. But once it gets published in Italian, I hope it will. Well, looking at the patterns of what has happened across different countries, I would say that it is likely to have an impact. But I think that overall, even worldwide, academia is opening up to studying these kind of practices.
Mm-hmm. Which is good.
Yeah, it is still difficult for people like us who are scholars in this field to, stay in academia and get funding for our research. But we are doing our best to.
Well, I commend you, definitely, absolutely. People like you is what makes us practitioners feel validated. Simply put, right? Jean Jerome, did you want to say anything before we take any questions from our audience?
I've got a lineup of things to touch on.
Okay,
on this subject
go ahead. I'm
academics,
making my coffee. Coffee here. So go ahead. Go ahead. Talk amongst yourselves.
This is for your benefit as well, Angela. So just in terms of the importance, this is a book that was published, Le Phare entre croyance et science, pour l'épistémologie de savoir africain. This was a group of scientists, mathematicians, and also anthropologists. And the summary here is very apt, because it basically says this book answers three questions by examining Ifa and Fa in West African system of knowledge and practices, which a narrow knowledge reduces to a fanciful divinatory art, an art then logically perceived as inconsistent and theoretically useless, which echoes the attitudes you mentioned you found with some academics or individuals. Then it says, yet more than a divinatory art, Ifa, when we submit it to analysis, appears to be an organized set of knowledge and researches, a science in the making. What makes us really think that way is the intellectual vocation that defines Ifa, the rigor of the logical operation that implies and which recalls in one way or the other the game of implicit mathematics, objectivity requirement which is valued by the actors of the system and rests on a genuine critical tradition. So the reason I mention this is these are one of those books not written by solely a practitioner, solely on the accepted corpuses or accepted traditions or practices, but like what you're doing, takes an objective or more empirical approach, a comparative approach to the practice, and to show its merits. In other words, to cast away the notion that it's illogical, irrational, irrelevant, and everything else. So it is those types of investigations and works which are very, very critical. And that book was, of course, a collaboration between, again, academics, both in mathematics and also in anthropology, and practitioners of the Fa. There was Bokono and in Benin and Babalaos in Nigeria. So I just wanted to quickly show that, also for
That's brilliant.
And so, yeah, no, it's that's why you can see I'm excited. I'm always very supportive of the working with the academic community in a respectful way, in an objective way, to try to bring out the merits and the value of these traditions, which truthfully, like many of the Fa divination system itself was entered into the UNESCO intangible patrimony of humanity for the divination system, and to protect the tradition, to protect the geomancy and so forth. The more academic work that is done to support and to validate these, and to bring them to light, and to show their deep roots and their deep value to society, to culture, to the history, and to the people, the more these beliefs can be protected, by institutions like UNESCO, right? Which is critical. Which is the one that actually hired my mom in Cuba for that very purpose, to look at how these traditions survived, after slavery, and how prevalent they were, right? So, so my question, and then we have a question from one of our audience members. So we've touched upon your study without, again, divulging your thesis or putting your thesis in any form of jeopardy. When you've had this participatory involvement, participant observation, did any of the practitioners, from your observations of Italian shamanism, Signatori, and so forth, did they touch upon their cosmology? In other words, what are the divinities or the sort of range of spirits or gods or whatever term they would use that they work with, that they venerate? Is Signatori, impregnated really with the Christian, sort of cosmology, or do they preserve a more ancient shamanic, like a veneration of elementals, a veneration of earth deities, sky deities? What was your finding?
That depends on the practitioner. I'd say that overall they tend to work mostly with the saints, but the way they work with the saints is that they treat them as spirits rather than saints according to the Catholic theology. And but I've also come across Segnatori, or some of these healers have talked about spirits. Like, for example, there was a healer from Sicily who said that she had a spirit who told her to do certain things, and she just called it a spirit. And there is the Italian shaman who calls herself a shaman. She actually employs a lot of elemental forces. So she talks about air, fire, water, and earth, but also she works with the moon, with the moon phases, and with the Etruscan deity, with an Etruscan deity called Uni. And Uni is like Pachamama.
Spell that.
It's UNI.
I think Dr. Gianmichael Salvato has mentioned Uni.
Yes.
Uni as being more of I believe, unless I don't want to misquote or misrepresent, but my recollection was in a private conversation, Uni is very much like a sky or an air elemental, which he likened to Obatala within the Yoruba, because he's familiar with also the Yoruba structure, to an Obatala. Teresa accidentally hung up. Her coffee mug probably hit the button, but that's okay. She'll reconnect. Is that your
Yeah.
finding? Is that your understanding? Did you dig deeper? Like when they mentioned those names, were you able to find any academic records and all that describe that particular deity?
No, normally when my informants talk me about their practices, I don't. My research is anthropological; it's not historical, so it is not really part of my research to go and see the roots of the beliefs in Uni. To me, it is just a way of seeing how many of these Italian witches or practitioners do include Uni, and this person was the only one who mentioned Uni. And yeah,
And
but
she was in
most
Sicily.
no.
No?
This is she's from wow just she's from Calabria, and
Calabria.
but now she's
Calabrese.
in the yes, Calabrese. She's from originally from Calabria, but now she lives in the north.
Okay.
And yeah, she was talking about the Etruscan deity, and she seemed to have more of a pagan kind of religious framework. But these kind of practices I don't think they can be deemed as a religion. They are like witchcraft. They are practices which may or may not include religious elements, but they are not religions in and of themselves. So I'd say that overall they tend to work with the saints. That's the most common thing. Even illnesses have a different name in this tradition. So, for example, even illnesses, illnesses, diseases.
Yep.
For example, there is an illness which they call Saint Anthony's fire. Which is the herpes zoster, I think.
San Antonio.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, they work a lot with the saints, and in most cases, I'd say that they have a relation. They relate themselves to the saints as if they were spirits more than the way the Catholic Church portrays the saints. So maybe this is similar to what they do in Santeria.
Yeah,
they form a relationship.
Yeah, they're more like the saints. The reason syncretism worked in Santeria was the association with a Catholic saint based on its attributes, with the Orisha being a divinity which had previous spiritual form, took on an earthly mission, was a blessed Ori, and because then of its accomplishments and the miracle or people working with that divinity and venerating that divinity, took on a stature of a divinity, right?
I guess in that sense it is different, because in Santeria there has been a syncretism between previous entities and the saints, whereas in Italy it is just the saints who are interacted with as spiritual entities that can help.
The thing is, though, and this is very critical based on your observation and your research. So just to be clear, like the Orisha are living, breathing, living consciousness. In other words, those are spirits that have, let's say, if you would talk about in spiritual terminology, have great elevation, have great, have achieved a status in their spiritual power and their spiritual enlightenment, that they're able to affect and manifest material changes and effects in our natural world. So the Orishas are not like what I'm sort of alluding to. My question is, the Orishas are living, breathing embodiment, and we work with them every day. The same way that if they work with a saint, it's an ancestor which achieved a certain, because of prayers to them, because of their work and so forth, they receive a certain status and are considered to have a certain elevation spiritually. But my question was, with this Uni, did she view, or did she have, for this one person that called and trust in divinity, that spirit, did you have a sense that she worked with that spirit in the same capacity, or in the same sort of living, breathing interaction that the other ones would interact with the spirits of the saints?
And no, I guess that her approach was more pagan. And it is also important to say that there are quite a lot of practitioners, especially in the old generation, who kind of perform these practices in a very mechanical way. So not, with all that spiritual component being all that present, but it really depends on the person and on the generation. So, and also it is important to say that people in the old generation tend to kind of conceal the spiritual aspect as well. So it might not come across as evidently as it does with people in the new generation, which tend to be more open about their practices.
Okay. One last question, then I'm going to pass. There's at least one question very interesting from a Natalie Bishop, which I'm going to post in a moment. In these belief systems, did you see any practitioner that had in their family lineages any members of their family that were in Freemasonry, that had some Masonic?
Yeah, I'm not sure why you're asking this question, but yes.
Sorry, our connection just froze a little bit. I don't know did you hear the question, or I don't know if you responded or not.
I heard the question, and the answer was yes. There have been informants who are also connected to Freemasonry.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm wondering, why did you ask this question?
That's a long conversation, and that's for the whole other show. But that's a long conversation. I'll explain offline. But there is a main reason for that. There is a very main.
It's not common though. It's not common, right. But yeah, it does happen.
Yeah, you will find Masonry. I'll just say this: you will find Masonry in behind the scenes in many traditions, right? In many traditions, you'll see Masonry over not just now, but over centuries, millennium, that is working behind the scenes, right? And as a repository for certain secrets, traditions, and formulae in terms of dealing with the spirit world. Just as a side note, my great-grandfather, Jean-Ignace Huguet, and his son, Ignacito Huguet, were both 33rd degree Masons. So that's one of the reasons why we have Masonry in our family. So that's one of the reasons why, and I'm essentially initiated into Ogboni, which is, many would argue, is a form of West African Masonry. So that's why I was curious, if there is an equivalent to Ogboni or some form of Masonic or secret society that sort of acts as the backbone or the backdrop of a lot of these practices.
I guess that now I understand better the question, and in this case, I'd say that no. So this practice is not related to Masonry, but there may be people who are initiated to Freemasonry and also have in their family or have been initiated to this tradition of Italian vernacular healing. So, but there is no relation between this tradition and Masonry, not at all.
Okay.
So it's just, that incidentally you can find a person who is also somewhat related to Masonry, but it's not something that is related to the tradition per se.
Okay. No, that's good. I appreciate that, because that's something especially in Europe, Masonry was quite prevalent, right? So it still is, not was, it is. It's still a force globally. Freemasonry is still very much alive and very much a force in the world. A question from Natalie Bishop. What regions in particular practice signatura, or is it widespread in Italy?
The practice of the segnatura is widespread, but at first the term segnatura was only utilized in Emilia-Romagna. But then, thanks to the internet and the wider communication between communities of practitioners, now the term segnatura has become more used and understood across different regions. And that's why I decided to adopt that one, because the other regions didn't have any term at all to describe the practice, whereas in Emilia-Romagna, they did have the term segnatura. And I guess that it kind of filled a void for practitioners once they were exchanging knowledge on the internet. And so they started using it. And so I sort of detected the trend and jumped onto it. And that's why I employ that specific term to classify and systematize that tradition.
Okay. A shout out from Jennifer.
Hi.
Hi, Jennifer.
We were
Hi,
just speaking
Jennifer.
about you.
Thanks for tuning in.
I don't know if
we were talking about you earlier. Only good things.
Were your ears burning, Jennifer? We were talking about.
We love Jennifer. She's a wonderful, very, very knowledgeable. And I thank you, Andrea, Angela, because it was thanks to you bringing her or interviewing her
on your show
that I had the idea to interview both of you. The only thing is, somehow I got through to Jennifer before I was able to get through to you. So, but I appreciate that.
Yeah, Jennifer is very articulate, and I really like how she speaks, and both in terms of content and how she articulates her thoughts. It's very pleasant to hear, and very, you feel smarter afterwards just by listening to her.
Definitely. So are there any other questions that Jean-Jerome, you said Gian, our former guest Gian Michael wanted to say something?
He only just joined, so we'll rewatch later for that. Laugh out loud. Okay, Natalie's on a roll here. Natalie has another question.
Okay.
You mentioned gestures and words. Can you comment on some of the other spiritual technologies, I would say, in quotation marks, employed in the practice?
What do you mean by spiritual technologies? Other techniques?
Like tools, I would say, or not spiritual tools, or like you use gestures, you use words.
I think we touched upon that.
No, but actually, let's bring up one very interesting question. In this practice, did you find any evidence in terms of the healing process? Was there any component having to do with ceremonial ceremonies that involve some sort of offering, sacrifice, be it food, be it
interesting,
offering, or being animal sacrifice, or any form of energy exchange of that nature?
No. Speaking of other techniques, there are other techniques. Like, for example, there was a person from Sardinia and another from Tuscany who talked about remove the fear, which, as they described it, is quite similar to soul retrieval in shamanism, which is done by utilizing a napkin. So that's not, I guess, a segnatura in that of it's not just a gesture accompanied by words. Your question was about sacrifices and offerings. No, I don't think they are very common. I don't think I can really exclude categorically anything, because there might be that one group of practitioners which I haven't come across. But no, I'd say that they are not common. What they do is that they won't accept any payment for their healing. And so when somebody does give them, for example, in Sicily, there were a few informants saying that when they got paid, and they didn't want to outright refuse it because they wouldn't ask for a payment, but sometimes people would give them something anyway. So they would bring it to the local church as a donation because they didn't want to keep it. So I guess that they can be considered like a form of sacrifice. So they sacrifice their time and energy, and they don't ask for anything in return. And if they get something in return, they will donate it. So I guess that can be classified perhaps as a form of offering or sacrifice.
I think to me, it sounds like an exchange, an energy exchange with the individual shamanic practitioner or healer with the person. For example, that reminded me of when I did a little bit of more research on the Polish Szeptuchy, and when people would come to them and they would bring them, yes, money, which they would donate, but they would bring them, let's say, bread, potatoes, that kind of thing. Obviously they took it, right? Because, they got something and the person who came to them got something, right? So there's that energy exchange. I didn't see any sort of sacrifices, animalistic or anything, because these are very much folk magic, that type of folk magic, and the healing was based on that. So I think that's what you're trying to say, Angela, is that, was this more of a common thing, more of a common practice in that sense?
What would be the common practice?
An exchange of, let's say, goods, bringing
normally they
potatoes, a piece of bread, or a loaf of bread.
Normally they wouldn't even accept potatoes or bread. They would just donate it.
Okay.
So there are people who practice segnature who also do other things like shamanism or other holistic therapies, and they would receive payment for those practices. But then when they have to employ techniques from the Italian folk healing tradition, they wouldn't ask for any payment, because that's kind of a rule that they have. Of course, I cannot rule out that there might be a person who actually accepts payments, but I'd say that the large majority of the people I've interviewed, actually most of them, if not all of them, have reported that this is quite a strict rule that they abide by.
Okay. I just wanted to say, excuse me, I have to put my battery pack on my phone because I'm down to 4%, and I'll be right back. So go ahead.
No problem. Okay, Natalie, again. Natalie, thank you for your participation, your active participation.
Yeah, thank you, Natalie, for your questions.
Is there a connection between the natural world and the practice, like use of certain herbs, roots, or resin, almost like root work? Did you see say in other ways, is there root work in this practice of segnature?
The practice of the segnature is mostly done by gestures and words, but there are occasionally practitioners who also utilize roots and herbs but these would be the kind of practitioners who have, I'd say, a stronger connection to their spiritual practice.
Okay.
Because as I said, there are also town healers who perform these gestures and these signature in a mechanical manner, so to speak. So at least when you look at them, it looks like they are just cooking pasta. So it's like a very mundane action for them.
Right.
Whereas you have others who have a stronger connection to their spiritual practice, who tend to be more, I guess, well-rounded and employ also the use of herbs and roots.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, certainly the two case studies, because I have a chapter in my doctoral research with two case
Mm-hmm.
studies from practitioners of segnature who identify as shamans. And
Mm-hmm.
in both cases, they also use herbs and roots. But I wouldn't say that root work is a trait of Italian folk healing tradition.
Do you think they use prayer? Is this something that they use? Because you said that they syncretize with Catholic saints and they form relationships. So is it more in the sense of prayer that they use as a tool? I didn't want to delve too deep into this because I know that, sometimes these may be secretive and they don't want to, give this out. But is this what's a common practice, is prayer as opposed to any other sort of mechanical tools that they use?
Yes, they also use prayers, especially the old generation, because the old generation utilizes more a syncretism with Catholicism, whereas the new generation tends to syncretize more with paganism. So that's another thing that I maybe I didn't touch on earlier, but yeah. So they do use prayers, but the core practice are the gestures and the words. And these words are secretive, and they are usually in the local dialect, and they are passed down from a blood relative, usually according to the tradition. So these are not words that I don't know what it is, whether it's I only know that quite a few informants have told me that they are words that you wouldn't necessarily associate to this kind of magical practice. There was an informant who told me that she was really surprised when her grandmother whispered the words in her ear during the initiation, because they seemed very mundane and random words, not anything special. That's what she said. Of course, I don't know what these words were, because these are secretive.
And would you say that? And would you say that the I mean, I know it's a little vague, and there's a secrecy sort of surrounding it. But do you have a sense of the language? You say the language, local dialect, but are we talking about a local dialect really of Italian, or are we talking about a language or words that are borrowed from, let's say, an older, like from even Latin or other?
No, the local dialects. Italy is a very young country, so every region has a dialect, which in some cases it's a language in and of itself. So Neapolitan is a language recognized by the UNESCO, and so it is the Sicilian and Sardinian. So Neapolitan, Sardinian, and Sicilian are languages, and all the other regions have their own dialects, which so normally it is either the dialect from the region or even dialect from the town, because even different towns and villages may have even strong variations from the regional dialect. So like, for example, in my home region, which is Campania, because I'm from Naples, as I said, you have a slightly different dialect in Naples than you have in Caserta, because Caserta is about an hour by train from Naples, and it is a slightly different dialect. So basically these countryside healers tend to use the language of their town.
Okay.
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 It's interesting. Go ahead. I was just going to say it's interesting because I remember when I had watched that small clip about the Szeptuchy witches in Poland, the Whispering Witches. My observance of these women, and I'm going to just describe the one scene of one of the women. She puts, you were saying, a scarf or a kerchief. She had put a white, I would say, not a kerchief, but a handkerchief on a person's head. And as she is actually doing her work, she is praying, and you could see she's in a slight trance, and the words she's using, it's exactly like I was listening to her whispering, and as she's saying the words, they were very mundane, okay? And it was the way she was saying it and the way her eyes would go up, and you know, just simple things like taking, I think it was like dried grass or straw above the person's head and lighting it. And this was to take away something that plagued this person, right? Some evil or something like this. But it was the prayers, and they were from an Orthodox Bible. Okay, but this was an association that the practitioner themselves had linked with their practice, the prayers, etc. And obviously these older women, this is now dying out. There are new practicing witches. And it's interesting, I wanted to ask you about the newer practitioners using paganism. And what do you mean using paganism? In what sense?
So
as opposed to the older ones.
So based on that question, Teresa, it basically slightly echoes Jennifer's that says that's really interesting. The borderland between Christianity and paganism is something I'm really interested in. Also, magic in a Christian context, somewhat similar to what you just asking. So
I saw that out of my corner of my eye. I saw that out of the corner of my eye, and that's why I'm asking, because it's exactly how I wanted to ask my question, was the paganism versus the prayers, because I had described what I had seen and what I heard was transpiring, and these were very mundane words when you said that, and it was like, okay, so there's a bit of, to me, an observance is that this person has to have a amount of mediumship abilities, and they're linked to go into a trance. It's using the tools. Now, I find that's interesting. How do the young ones, can you go ahead and tell me, how do they use the paganism? You know, because it's such an overused word now when we say paganism. Is it the symbols that they use, or?
Well, I think that the reason why they may be syncretizing it more with paganism is that those who are actively interested in retrieving the folk magical practices of their grandmothers, they tend to be interested in witchcraft before they start engaging with this tradition. So their outlook, because normally people who are Catholics, they wouldn't really be
look into the roots.
Yeah, they wouldn't really look into acquiring magical powers and magical techniques. So this is an issue that a few healers have even reported, that they didn't have anyone to initiate in their families because they didn't really find value or believe in what they were doing. Whereas those who are interested in paganism and in witchcraft, they will give value to the traditions of their families. And so, but then when they get passed down those techniques, since they have a different religious framework, because they perhaps believe in goddesses and gods, they tend to syncretize these things. So, for example, instead of performing the initiation on Christmas Eve's night, they would do it on the winter solstice. Okay. Because that is more in line with their belief system. Okay. And there's also an informant of mine who told me that she feels uncomfortable using some of the segnature because they include the Trinity, and so she's trying to substitute the Trinity with a pagan equivalent of sort. So
Right.
so yeah, they tend to kind of change the syncretism. So maybe they might still use the gestures, but they would change. You know, instead of calling upon the saints, they might call upon a deity they have been working with.
So do you think by doing that, are they awakening those other entities, those pagan former gods or goddesses? And in doing so, do you think that this gives them more power? Because I'm looking at it from this angle. If they do engage with an older entity, has this entity been waiting in the sidelines, or has this entity always been with them? And in doing so, it's like, you know, for example, me this morning waking up and getting, you know, my second cup of coffee because I'm not really quite awake. So, I mean, how much power do I have until my second cup of coffee and suddenly I'm all okay? So what I'm getting at is, if you're awakening these older entities, these older energies, how are they going to get stronger? Is it by accumulating more people to feed that energy? Or is it themselves forming that relationship with that energy that finally, after giving them their second cup of coffee, if you want to look at it as giving them offerings and giving them a relationship, you're starting a relationship. Do you know where I'm going with this? Is this something that you think is going to get better in time, or what's been your observance, or what's your personal take on that?
I'm not sure I understood the question, to be honest.
Okay. So for example, you're saying the new practitioners are going to their more pagan roots. And by doing so, are they actively activating energies of older gods and goddesses?
They believe they do, yeah.
Okay, so taking that, by doing that, are those gods and goddesses always been with them as a form of energy and entity around them? Or are they basically, suddenly it's like you're knocking on this ancient entity or god or goddess knocking on the door going, hey, hi, I'd like to work with you. And you know what, I'm doing this. And you suddenly start going into all of this. And they are, for example, like me, let's just say I'm one of those entities, or there's gods or goddesses. I'm waking up going, oh, hold on a second. What? You want what? You want me to do who? What? I need a cup of coffee.
I think
you know what I'm saying? Like,
I think I get your question, and I'm not sure, but tell me if I'm answering it.
Okay.
So normally these people already have a relationship with certain gods. As I said, they tend to be pagans or interested in witchcraft to begin with.
But what I'm saying is, yeah, go ahead. I'll let you finish.
Maybe it is a way of integrating their pagan practice in some cases.
And that's what I was questioning, is the integration of itself. When you're, in other words, when you're waking up energies that have not been used before in the form of these goddesses, like what I'm asking is, what type of gods or goddesses are they associating with? The gods and goddesses associated with the land, with Italy, in that specific area? Or are they in general going to, let's say, a god or goddess of a different
culture,
pantheon or culture? Because what I'm getting at is, if you're going to do that, okay, for example, you've got this older generation you know, and they're building this power and they're continually doing their practices, and there's others that are doing this. They've been doing this for a millennia, okay? Let's say 100 years, 1,000 years. And they've been doing this. There is a certain amount of power around them. And then along comes the newer generation, and they want that, but they don't want the syncretism with Catholicism. How are they bringing their pagan roots into this? Like, how are those energies coming through to them? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, you know what I'm getting at, John Jerome?
I hear you. No, I hear you. No, I hear you. No, I think, again, the main point I think where we're driving at is, you know, is the individual. So let's separate the belief system from the individual. Is the individual practitioner, new practitioner, pulling from other traditions, like Wicca or other Druidry,
Yes.
or other traditions, to bring that into the practice of Signatori, or are they trying to awaken within the Signatori, like your friend whom you mentioned, whose work was Uni? Are they trying to work
Yes.
with or wake up ancient beliefs,
Yes.
or work with ancient divinities within the own, which sort of relates back to my original question about the pantheons or the different cosmology
Yes.
within their own structure?
You
Yes,
get
that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, you get both cases, but I say the majority tend to work with deities from different cultures.
That's it. Yeah.
But
Okay.
yeah, you also get the practitioners who want to go back to their roots, but not necessarily. I'd say
That's
that
what I was getting at.
most pagans in Italy are very much influenced by Wicca, and specifically from the eclectic Wicca.
Yeah.
Understood.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna.
Understood. I don't want to pass judgment, but I'm trying to get like, okay, I get where it's going. Okay.
Yeah. In the interest of time, because I promised Angela we try to keep it within the 2 hours,
Right.
because she had a
Absolutely.
little bit of a hard stop in her time zone. I'm just gonna voice these questions in reverse order. First, Natalie, just more of a comment than a question. Many of those deities never cease to be worshipped, or they continue their worship in syncretization with more modern divinities. That's just more of a comment she has. Now, Ken Allen, also more of a comment. In some Native American tribes, the medicine men will use some aspects of Christian prayers and indigenous prayers, burn sweet grass over the person's head to extract the malady from the person's head and body. They would cover their head with an animal pelt whilst performing the medicine procedure.
Good.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
I'll make a quick comment on both. All those things that you've outlined, the reason, the underlying metaphysical principle of doing that is that when you do any work with somebody's odi, with somebody's soul, you are opening up a portal right in their head. When you make incantation, whatever the tradition, or you put in the elements or ingredients, whether it be blood, whether it be natural elements, food, grass, whatever, you are basically awakening and strengthening that inner God, if you will, the inner soul. And you must cover the head in order, because once you've opened it, that area is exposed, energetically it's exposed. So covering it with a white cloth and all that is to protect the Odi from, like a wound, right? You're doing a surgery, essentially. You're fixing what's here, and before it can close, because it won't close right away, you have to cover the wound with a bandage. That's what that metaphysically, whether it be Ifa, whether it be Vodou, whether it be any tradition, that is the metaphysical principle that is going on, and almost visible in every shamanic or indigenous or spiritual belief.
What I wanted to say was, you think of it like birthing, going through the birth canal and the soft fontanelle of an infant when coming through. It's that triangular shape, and this is what you're protecting, so that they're almost like, well, basically what you're doing as a shaman is you're rebirthing this person
Correct.
into the life,
Yeah.
into
And
life with.
and in Orisha practice, when you do dosu, when you do the crowning, when you bring down one of the Orisha or spiritualities or Vodou, within Vodou, into the crown, into the head, into the soul, to cohabit the Orio de, the head that you have,
Mhm,
that's why
mhm,
the Iyawo in the term of Yoruba practice must have their head covered, especially when they
mhm,
go outside at all time, because they're a baby, like you just said, Teresa. They have just passed
mhm.
through. They've been rebirthed, and spiritually, their head is open, right? So you must keep
Yes.
it covered and maintain the medicines that are required to keep the head protected from other contaminants or ajobu or elini, negative energies that basically can attack that ori while it's in this vulnerable state of birth, right? So
Mhm.
I'm going to, we have, just people commenting Ashe or yes, and then Aburuboye David, he's in Spain. David
Mhm.
Gomez Lopez is in Spain, is one of the Babalaos of IFA World Conference, Council of 17 Babalaos internationally that I belong to, with Baba Fabiyi in Mexico. Um, so, in the interest of time, Angela, because I'm a man of my word, or at least I try to be, um,
Yes.
a quote or something that sort of summarizes your your journey so far, whether it be academic or your personal journey, something, words you live by or things you.
Mhm.
Uh, Things are connected by invisible ties. You cannot pick a flower without upsetting a star.
Okay,
Nice.
very nice,
This is
very very nice.
attributed
Ashe.
to it's attributed to Galileo Galilei. But
Excellent,
yeah.
excellent, very very good.
Very
Very nice,
good.
very nice.
Okay. So now,
Okay,
and Ken,
yeah, yeah,
just going to read a couple of last comments before we say our goodbyes. Ken Allen, yes, because it's exposed during the process and covering it protects it from further invasion, for lack of a better term. Thank you.
correct,
Yes,
correct, exactly.
exactly.
And
Exactly.
that's a fundamental principle, if you will. Because
Hmm.
at that point, that's where I was saying that the spirituality becomes a science, because it's the
Yeah,
same procedure. If you have an open wound, you tend to stitch it up, put whatever medicine,
absolutely.
antibiotic,
Yeah,
and close. So it's the same thing with ori, with your head. So, all right.
absolutely.
So to everybody tuning in, thank you very much for this special edition, Saturday morning sort of brunch edition, with Angela Puca in England, joining us from England. Angela, thank you so much for accepting to
Yes,
be on the
Angela.
show. I found
Thank you.
our interaction to be very informative. I believe everybody else did as well. And again, as I
Absolutely.
said to all our guests, please, this is not a one-time event. Please consider you have family in Canada, and people that are interested in your field of research, and the
Hmm.
broader field of research of academic inquiry into indigenous belief
Hmm.
systems. And any way we can collaborate, if you have events or
Hmm.
uh,
Hmm.
any type of initiatives that you want to advertise or promote, feel free to do so. Send it to
Yes.
us. We'll post it on Ancestral Eyes or with the page and the group. And is there a preferred way, last sort of parting remark, is there a preferred way you like people to contact you? What is the way you like people to, send you their questions, or if they
Mhm.
want to contact you, directly to have some sort of interaction? What is the best way for them to reach you?
First off, thank you for inviting me here again, and I'd like to thank everybody who has been watching this show. I guess that I'd like to remind everybody who's interested in the academic study of magic to check out the YouTube channel Angela Symposium. And
Mhm.
I guess that's the first best way to contact me, because I reply to each and every comment. So
Nice.
and and I also have my email on the YouTube channel, listed on the YouTube channel. So
Mm.
yeah. I guess that's the
Okay.
best way to contact me.
Yeah, and then on
Perfect.
Facebook, you're found as Angela Puca's.
I also I also have the Facebook page and the Instagram page, but I'd say the most active social is my YouTube channel.
And I'll put a pitch in here for you as well. I'm actually modestly one of your patrons.
Thank you for that.
On Patreon, and I encourage anybody who is interested and has a vested interest in these traditions being studied, being being looked into, being properly represented from an academic perspective, and being brought into mainstream awareness and knowledge to support Angela in her excellent work. And she produces videos on YouTube, very informative. She takes always an academic posture to all the different topics of paganism, esotericism, magic, and so forth. So I encourage you to look her up on Patreon, Angela Puca. I'm a patron. So as to all our guests, anything we can do as a community to support each other, please do.
Absolutely. Now, I want to say thank you to all our guests who tuned in. Always, we're grateful that you do. We have a following. We're happy that you tune in, and thank you for tuning in this Saturday. Now, we do have a little creature who watches us, your godson, but unfortunately, we can't put up his picture, or he is not able to watch us today because he had gone to the vets to get neutered. Poor little guy. But
he's having a rough day.
He's having a rough day. He's in his crate and he's crying, and from the sounds of it, he doesn't like it. But our thoughts are with the little guy. Now, Jean-Jerome, just quickly, I know you yourself are going to be getting your own little kitty. Am I correct in believing that?
That is correct. That is the plan. I'm hoping to pick him up in the next little while. So he will be. I've named him Ekun. Ekun, which means in Yoruba is Atemokun, which means the leopard, which is a sacred animal for Ifa, because he's all black, blue eyes.
That's really cute. So anyway, we're going to close the show with that. And again, thank you, Angela. Thank you so much for coming on our show. It's been very informative. As always, I've learned a lot, and I'm sure everybody who tunes in learns a lot from these shows. So I thank you. I thank you, Jean-Jerome, for doing all the technical work. And as my co-host, I thank you as well. And I'm starving now. Now I've had my 2 cups of coffee. I'm awake, baby. But now I'm starving, so I got to go and eat.
In Canada, we're going to have a late lunch, and in England, I believe Angela's going to have dinner.
Yes.
We're probably hungry as well. Many blessings, Angela. Much success.
Yes.
May your defense of your thesis be successful. May we count you among learned academic in terms of your PhD. Continue the good work, and many blessings on your and continued journey. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Aburaboye Boshashe, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Take care. Have a great weekend. Wonderful Saturday.
Bye.